the face with a name too, and to get a little story. I've had computer problems this morning, so, but I think I've got them sorted out now, so we should be good to go.
Yeah, great. I'll just say that this is very exciting for me. Yeah, I've been watching you for like a year now. I guess I just graduated from undergrad. And I got into Peterson when I was a freshman, but then I had kind of a lull when he first, blew up in 2016. And then I kind of had a lull of interest. And then because of whatever was going on, I watched a couple Peterson videos and I saw someone's comment, "Have you seen Paul Vanderklay's commentary on Jordan Peterson?" And then I just fell down that, and I've watched like almost every video since for like a year.
My. Well, thank you.
Exciting.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? We'll start there at least.
Sure. Yeah, I guess like I said, I just finished undergrad, but I've seen these videos, so you have to start with like where I went to church and stuff. But
there's a culture that's developed.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm even wearing the pineapple shirt today. A dude did a little sketch of me, and he had the pineapple shirt in it. So
I haven't seen that.
Anyway.
But yeah, I guess I grew up in Pennsylvania around Philadelphia. My dad is a statistician. My mom is a physicist, and we went to like an evangelical church in the area. It's a very old church, actually. It's like 100 years old, but it is non-denominational evangelical, and it's relatively Baptist. And so I was more or less, I'm half Armenian as well. So up until I was 10, I went to a Armenian Catholic school, which is 80% Orthodox. So the Armenians are mostly Orthodox, but they were all going to a Catholic school because only the Armenian Catholic groups have the money to fund that properly. But then I was a Protestant who's only half Armenian, and I was there.
Wow, that's cool. So I love it.
There's a big mix of people. But and I remember when I was like 7, 8, I didn't call myself Protestant. I called myself anti-Catholic, like specifically.
Wow.
That was my religious consciousness at the time. Like when they would do Hail Mary, I would just mouth the words and I wouldn't say it out loud so that I wouldn't get caught or anything like that. And yeah, but then and then after the school went up to 8th grade, but because of other problems with the school, my mom started homeschooling us when I was in 6th grade. And I met a lot of other people who were also Catholic, but we became really close. I became really close friends with them, the homeschooling community in the area. And we and so that's when I got into more, I guess around 9th grade, started to get really into like politics and political philosophy. And my dad has been a libertarian since like the Libertarian Party started. And I guess that's how I got into it. And that's kind of the niche I stuck in and have kind of stuck in for a while. And so, and then at some point in high school, I got really into economics. And so that's when I decided on economics as sort of a career path. And then in college, I started going to George Mason University for economics, which I don't know if you know the reputation of George Mason. It's, I'd say, somewhat infamous because we're the #1 school that Charles Koch donates to for like his programs and stuff like that. So I am branded like that with the Koch stamp. So that's something to watch out for. But and so yeah, but then I guess when I was a senior in high school, I was in an AP European history class, and most of the other people in the student were, or most of the other students in the class were liberals or non-Christians or of that crowd, and so, or atheists or something like that, including some of my really good friends. But and so that's when I got to the point where not only did I have to defend my like free market capitalism, but also my faith, right? Because we were going through the canon of Western civilization, ending with like Marx and modern times and Sartre and all these things. And so that's when I had to really start getting into that stuff. And I just kind of like found myself like re-justifying everything. And I had a conversation with Matthew Allison that he put up on his channel.
Yeah.
And this is some of what I talked about there. And I said, like, for some reason, I just found a 10-minute video on Leibniz's cosmological argument. I watched that, and then I was like, that's it. That's the foundation of everything. And then I just started justifying things up from there. And then I went off to college, and I had a foundation for everything. So there's not much to learn after that. But but then very soon, like 2-3 months into college, that foundation collapsed. I didn't believe in the argument anymore. And exactly at that time, those videos of Peterson, the first free speech things, started to show up. And it didn't, I remember I just watched it because I was watching those whatever SJW fail compilations that were floating around at the time, and Peterson was like a main character in those. And then I watched his Joe Rogan podcast, and in that one he said something like, "I'm deeply religious." And I remember, now that I think back on it, I was actually cleaning my room while listening to that podcast. And then he said something like, "I'm deeply religious." And then I like bought full sail into that. And I went like, okay, this is something that, and it wasn't really, I didn't really buy full sail into that yet. But over the next few months, I kind of got more and more out of faith and more depressed. But at the same time, I was listening to more Peterson. And at some point at the bottom, there was like an inflection point, like my second derivative of my soul or whatever hit 0 and then started to go back up somewhere around winter break of freshman year. So,
wow, you had a very brief meaning crisis then. You were already sipping the elixir as the illness was taking hold. And so
yeah.
Fascinating.
Very good timing on that one.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And then I guess I don't want to, a lot of stuff happened over college, obviously.
I have to ask if you're in
Yeah.
your mother's basement.
I am. Yes, I am.
Do you have any Cheetos?
No, I'm allergic to milk.
Oh,
So that's out of the question for me. But I do play Minecraft, so there's that. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Keep going. I should not interrupt.
No. Yeah, it's a good background kind of thing.
It's perfect.
Yeah, and so a bunch of stuff happened over, the past 4 years at college, but Peterson was like a weird rock throughout the whole time. And so me and my friends started to go. I was a big member of Intervarsity Christian Fellowship, and I was a small group leader for them for the last 3 years. And some of my friends through there, we started to go to a Anglican church in the area. And I started to get more into more liturgical kinds of things, more liturgical kinds of churches. And then this past fall, for other more complicated reasons that I don't understand probably, I was having like a different kind of faith crisis where it wasn't so much leaning towards atheism, but more towards like, I remember when I first got over that first hurdle of the meaning crisis, I went, there's two kinds of atheism. There's the Bertrand Russell kind of, oh, it's not logical, we don't have the evidence for it kind of atheism. And then there's the Nietzsche kind of, whatever, I'm going to be like a pagan and just try to defeat God myself kind of atheism. And then I remember thinking, okay, I defeated the Bertrand Russell type, but I haven't defeated the Nietzsche type. So this past fall was the Nietzsche type kind of coming around to bite me. And I'm not exactly sure what caused it or what made me think of it, but around November, me and some friends all realized, we were talking one day and we all realized that we had started getting into Eastern Orthodoxy. All of us, we were all in a small group together with Intervarsity, and our small group leader had graduated the year before. So we just kind of would loosely hang out, and we had a semi-small group. But almost all of us independently had been researching into Eastern Orthodoxy, and then we just found it all. We found out that we had all converged on that point together. So, and then we started to go to an Orthodox church. But it's not the kind of thing what I appreciated about it is it's not the kind of thing that you just get to go, okay, well, I'm Orthodox now. Like, okay, I go to this church now. Because that's kind of what I didn't like beforehand, is you just can say, okay, I'm an inquirer, I'm peeking my head in the door. But when you say these things, you're not making any declarations of faith yet, you know. And the stuff in economics that I'm interested in is like church history and economic history related to religion. And from the literature that I've been reading, most of it has to do with Catholic and Protestant fights in Europe, but there's almost nothing in the literature on the economic history of the Orthodox Church,
yeah,
or the political relationships of the Orthodox Church. So,
yeah.
And then you can see the Armenian stuff from way early on. There was that I had kind of the glimpse of it, but I had no idea what it was. And then it's kind of reached all the way around.
Well, I would imagine that's a huge, because I mean, the West, you know, in the Catholic world, they're just such prolific recorders of stuff. And so to be in that world, you are in many ways sort of encased in this silo. And what's been happening for a lot of reasons is that the rest of the world is sort of coming online. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes of what from, because you have the sense from the Orthodox side of things that there's a tremendously rich history out there. It's new to us. It's not new, but it's new to us. So fascinating.
One of the first videos that I had watched on Orthodoxy was by this guy, Josiah Trenum, who's a father out in California somewhere.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of his videos.
He came out with a book that they did some videos on called Rock and Sand, where he's claiming the Orthodox Church is built on the rock and the Protestant Church is built on the sand.
He used to be English Calvinist. I differentiate Dutch Calvinist from English Calvinist. So
yeah. And but one thing that he said was, like, when Luther started the Reformation, they were sending letters. He sent a letter to the Orthodox Church to say, like, oh, maybe we're going to commune with you. Like, they really didn't know what they were going to do. And then just the letter didn't reach them in time. And now we have this whole, like, huge divergence between Lutherans and Orthodox too.
That would have been a very interesting relationship between Luther and the Orthodox, because, oh, wow. You know, because I think now, you know, with the help of, you know, some fun scholars like Brett Sockold, we're getting I don't know why booksellers, you know, they should sponsor my channel, booksellers. I'm always holding up books, but they only hold up books I want to hold up. That's probably why they don't. Right. And Brett doesn't have any money because he's got 7 children. But
if you started doing that, then your channel would be less authentic. Maybe
that's true. My channel's very authentic. That's that's why I wear the pineapple bomb shirt to the authenticity thing rises. But his, you know, boy, that's just that would make a fun religious novel for some theological wonk to write if Luther's missive to the Orthodox, you know, found fruit. That would be fascinating, because Luther is just such a, you know, it was so interesting because when I first saw Peterson and began to understand what he was doing, I thought, you know, there's sort of a Lutheran quality to Jordan. You know, Luther kind of starts with an academic argument in the Roman Catholic Church because of other politics. It's like, let's burn him at the stake. And so most people say, I'll just keep it academic, you know, cut a deal, sign an NDA. Jordan Peterson isn't going to sign an NDA.
Yeah. I don't know. And I do hope he comes back soon, because I know he has been posting whatever his little tweets, but yeah, it's unclear whether or not it's him. And the stuff that's going on now, I would almost be scared to see what he thinks, because he might, I don't know if I'd like it necessarily, actually, sometimes. Like, he might have one of his angry tweets, which made me kind of cringe back in the day. So.
Which Jordan will emerge? Well, it's a good question, and given the hell the poor guy went through, and Vervaeke on a so now there's the Vervaeke Discord, and John's doing question and answer there, and he dropped, whenever anybody says something that's kind of associated with my work, people are very generous and they send it to me. But all of us have ambitions for Jordan's work, and of course Jordan is going to do what Jordan will do, but I really hope he doesn't get back into that trap that he really got into. He can be of so much use, but Jordan's going to be Jordan. Who are we to, if I had Jordan's brilliance, maybe I'd have 2 million YouTube subscribers instead of 13,000. So, yeah. And I certainly wouldn't want a lot of the other things that came his way. So,
in some ways, like, all of Peterson's followers kind of, I feel like there's definitely some that see him a very different way than we see him. They see him as a conservative pundit, right? And that's somewhat his fault, I think, too, for allying with those people, or maybe naively allying with them. But he was really, I don't think he didn't plan to, rise to fame or anything like that. So, well, he might have wanted.
I think he planned on it, but again, it's one thing to have a plan in your head. What actually happens is a whole different thing.
Yeah. But I almost feel like the group that's kind of coalesced around like this, our Discord and stuff like that, that's what I always saw in Peterson that many people maybe didn't see. And I think one problem too is he got caught with a lot of catchphrases, like people associate him with clean your room, or with I don't know, just some strange, they just think he is against trans people, or that's all they really know about him.
Yeah.
And and particularly the phrase postmodern neo-Marxism, people stick that right on him. Is that on that poster?
Bloody postmodern cultural Marxism, identity politics, moral relativism, ontological crisis, existential dread.
And that made me remember one of my professors at George Mason, Dan Klein. He was interested in Peterson maybe 2-3 years ago, and then he wrote a short article that got pretty popular on SSRN, which is it's a social science research sort of website that people can put articles up before they're published. It was a short article on Jordan Peterson's use of the word postmodern. So it's my professor saying, Peterson, I agree with you, but I think you're misusing the word postmodern. And he called it POMO bashing. That's not the strategy you should be taking. In fact, some of the earlier postmodern thinkers would probably be much more allied with him. Like William James is in some ways a postmodern thinker. And I mean, a lot of people, it's a weird word, and he probably hurt himself by using it too strongly.
Well, there's a thing that there's an element in reality that postmodernity elevates and illuminates, and that has been elevated and illuminated before. I mean, to what degree were the sophists postmodern? Mm-hmm. You can very much understand an element of postmodernity in pragmatism, because there's a beneath postmodernity is a deep skepticism, and the fact that skepticism today is so powerful, how wouldn't postmodernity emerge with the strength that it has? The difficulty about being a thoroughgoing skeptic or a cynic is it's not very comfortable living that way. And so people check out to find ways that are more comfortable and pleasing to live.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is sums up what Peterson's real thoughts on postmodern neo-Marxism are, but he stuck himself to this very specific phrase that if somebody is a postmodern or Marxist academic, they know what's wrong with that and they pick it apart immediately, and he looks silly.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And he didn't help his cause when he went to the Zizek debate, you know, sporting the Communist Manifesto, and Zizek's like, that old thing, you know, nobody believes that. Tell me what a Marxist is, really.
And it's not even just like current Marxists don't even use the Communist Manifesto. Marx didn't even really use the Communist Manifesto. It's just kind of a thing when he started that party, it's just on a thing they made him write, and he just kind of wrote it and then they flopped it around. But
so and Jordan, well, none of us are well read enough to not make mistakes like this. It's an innocent mistake, but at this level, his critics rightly will point to it and say, now, in all fairness, in the Zizek debate, I thought he's a quick thinker and he's quick on his feet and he was able to pivot. And I think partly to the generosity of Zizek, I thought they had a productive conversation. So, you know, good on them. They just never got the live stream. I paid for the live stream and had to watch a bootleg version on YouTube. It's like, dude, I'm trying to help you out here.
Yeah.
You know, at least get the live stream right. But, you know.
And I don't know much about Zizek, but he's like hilarious, actually, I think. And he's so fascinating. And he did another talk with Tyler Cowen, who's a professor at George Mason as well. And Cowen called him out and he said, I think like you're a conservative. And like that's what he said to Zizek, like relative to all these other kinds of leftists. And then Zizek, well, I don't remember his answer, but it was, Zizek is always fun to listen to, I think. And when they got into religion, it was, I did not expect that, but it was awesome.
When
they both started talking about that. Yeah.
Starts pulling out Chesterton. It's like, well, there's a turn I didn't see coming. I didn't know anything about Zizek, and I still don't know much about him, but that was fascinating.
He has these two movies that are like film criticism, which are very strange. What is it called? A Pervert's Guide to Ideology or something?
Yeah.
I watched one of them.
Yeah.
It's all Freudian analysis of different movies.
And the thing about Zizek is, I wonder to what degree the whole thing is just trolling. I mean, that's when I listen to him, it's like, is there any there with you, Zizek? What really is your game? Or is this the theater of the absurd because you really are you're a thoroughgoing postmodernist, and so the theater of the absurd is the most authentic thing you can perform, you know. So it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. There is one thing specifically that I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
I think, I don't know if you got, I sent you an email maybe last night with the phrase in it. For the past two Discord Q&As, I've tried to get this one on, but I always ask my question too late. But
this is an excellent way to get your question in.
Yeah, exactly. I think I did it in the middle of one of the Q&As. I signed up for this. But I've been reading William James's Varieties of Religious Experience on my channel with a friend, Caleb. And we found this phrase, and we've been watching your videos, and it is just perfect, especially in the conversations that you've had with Brett Weinstein about adaptation and like which environment are you in. So I guess, well, let me pull it up myself. It's from the chapter called The Value of Saintliness, where he first goes, in the chapter before, he goes through and he talks about all the different qualities that saints have, like these magnanimous characteristics of what he calls a saint, what it means to be a saint. But the next chapter, he starts to evaluate, okay, are these saints any good? If you're, starving yourself all the time, is this like a positive human achievement? But so I'll just read the first little part here. He goes, How is success to be absolutely measured when there are so many environments and so many ways of looking at the adaptation? It cannot be measured absolutely. The verdict will vary according to the point of view adopted. From the biological point of view, St. Paul was a failure because he was beheaded, yet he was magnificently adapted to the larger environment of history. And so far as any saint's example is a leaven of righteousness in the world and draws it in the direction of a more prevalent habits of saintliness, he is a success no matter what his immediate bad fortune may be. And I thought that's exactly what your commentary on Weinstein's things are, where he understands that religion has adaptive success beyond the biological, but he's not willing to claim that there is an environment beyond the biological.
Well, I don't know if that's fair to Brett. I think he, you know, with kind of his two-track thing, I think he more than most biologists acknowledges the cultural track, which is his beef against Richard Dawkins, that Dawkins came up with the idea but hasn't fully run it through, which is very much, Peterson has said very similar things. I just finished a conversation with a rule, which I'm sure he'll let me post. It was a great conversation. I spoiled it by doing too much preaching, but because he kept asking me preacher questions, and don't ask preacher questions unless you want a sermon. So maybe you've already failed. But that's a great quote, because it's exactly right. Because the question is, well, what game are you playing? And on the way, if I have time to make a video today or tomorrow, I'll probably make it about game B, which Rebel Wisdom just did a video, which probably YouTube algorithm served it up to you, which explained a lot to me about where Brett is coming from for this stuff. It's what these guys are doing is sort of like deciding you're going to found Tesla, but deciding you're going to never study anything by Henry Ford.
Right.
And what this quote makes obvious is that so Brett's big thing is humanity is endangered. Civilization needs a new operating system. And it's like, okay, I understand the threats. That's not new. Do you even have a conception of the thing it is you're trying to save? Humanity. What is that? And so that's exactly where, he's a magnificently adaptive to a larger environment of the history. And so, the Apostle Paul, and I know Jacob is just going to be, I mentioned Jacob in the last video too, the Apostle Jesus, he was really cool. He was like this Messiah figure, but the Apostle Paul was a fraud. And it's like, but that dude as a fraud totally took a variant of Judaism and colonized the Roman Empire and built it on Jesus' work and said that Jesus was doing it through him. And as Tom Holland, laid out in Dominion, and it sort of seems to be conquering the world in one form or another. And so when I listen to these Game B guys, it's like, I'm not sure you're even taking too many steps away from the secular-ish version of Christendom that you're trying to preserve, which has been a game of philosophers and theologians for the last 200 years. So, no, that's a great quote. Thank you for that. I actually picked up, I read Varieties of Religious Experience when I was in seminary, not for seminary, but I was just too interested in the book as if I needed extra books to read when I was in seminary. But I read it then and I was deeply fascinated by the book and really it'll be a whole different book. Cause even, I've been rereading Dr. King's Bearing the Cross. And I haven't, about 15 years ago, I read a whole bunch of King biographies. I tend to go in, I'm a little obsessive in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm rereading it again, and it's like all different things pop out at me. Now maybe sometimes the same thing. Because if I have the same book and I underlined it once, sometimes I'd see the underlying, oh yeah, that struck me then too. But sometimes it's like, wow, my life has changed and this is salient. So
that was one of the main, I didn't describe exactly what parts of Peterson really resonated with me when I first found him, but one of the actually biggest ones was William James and the Pragmatists. And so like after that, I really have not read Peterson's books very deeply. I watched one of the Maps of Meaning courses, but what really impressed me was William James, because I had only heard of the Pragmatists once before that, and all I heard was something like, well, they believed it's true if it works. And then I went, that's stupid, and then moved on. And then now like I'm full, that's what I bit full sail was pragmatism. And I don't know how much you've looked into William James' other stuff or about his ideas about the one thing that I've been doing too is I've been making lectures on this book, which is The Will to Believe. It's a collection of William James essays, including his most famous one is probably The Will to Believe. And they in the preface to that book, he says, this book, people think it's about philosophy, but really in a sense it's about religion. And what he was trying to do was turn religion away from this totally backward looking, he would say either logical or strictly rooted in the Bible. And he probably thought of that as Catholics and Protestants. As Protestants are these people who just read the Bible and believe it, and that's what it means to believe the truth. Or Catholics are these people that do, high philosophy and all the Thomistic kind of stuff, and that's the truth. And he said he wants to turn away from roots to fruits. That's one of the ways that he sums up pragmatism, is instead of the truth being in the root of an idea where it comes from, it's rather in the fruit where it leads to. And so that's the Varieties of Religious Experience is pragmatism in practice in that way, because it's not about, he's not worried so much about whether or not God put this idea in someone or if they just believe it themselves. He's saying it's an event that happened that they believed. Does religion make people's lives better? And better is, of course, he admits that's a weird, weak term, but that's also developing alongside this, our conception of better.
Yeah.
And so, and he ends that preface with saying, so what he comes up with, he says, I'm an empiricist, but I'm not just an empiricist, I'm a radical empiricist. So he says, by empiricist, I mean that all my beliefs I hold as hypotheses or as rules for action. So when I say I believe something, it means I live by it. And if my belief is leading me, to trip over a root or to fall off a cliff, then I should cut out the belief because of what it makes me do. So all of my beliefs, even like deep held religious binding beliefs, these are hypotheses that we're moving forward. So, and then when he says, I'm a radical empiricist, he says, you can have empirical opinions about the belief in God himself, because not because you saw God or you heard God, like you see a rock or something like that, but because your belief in God made you act in a way which you can see the effects of in the world. So a radical empiricist is someone who holds everything empirically, but is willing to hold anything empirically, even the belief in God or something like that. So he says, so what I'm calling for is to have a science of religion. So we should have a basic sphere of action where we'll respect each other's beliefs, but we should let people fully live their religion as they see fit, not so that everyone can have their own little window of, meaning, but rather so that everyone can participate in the grand laboratory of religion, of different people believing different things.
That's good stuff. And that's very Petersonian. And that's, wow, you're colonizing me hard, man. That's a good thing.
And if I think from watching you the past year, that's the one major thinker that's an influence on Peterson that I think that you've not touched enough is William James.
I think you're exactly right. So what's your YouTube channel's name?
The Econ Playground.
The Econ?
Yeah, like econ short for economics.
Oh, Econ Playground.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see.
Yeah, and so I've been doing since COVID hit. I
put a link to it in the chat a minute, and
okay, sure.
I'll be able to find it then.
Sure. Since COVID hit, I've gotten more involved with the Discord channel, and I made a video, like kind of a semi-humorous video, saying something like, oh, you know, Fairfax County, where I live in Virginia, officially says that all playgrounds are closed, but not this playground. And it's actually wide open and anyone can come in. So I've been doing conversations similar to your style and some lectures similar to you too.
Cool. All right. I'm sub 43.
All right. Very good.
Very cool. No, yeah. Part of the difficulty with Peterson is that, okay, I need to master maps of meaning.
Yeah.
This is a tortured book. It's a good book, but it's a tortured book. I need to know more Jung. I need to know Nietzsche. I need to know Kant. I need to know Hegel. And
yeah, I'm not going to do Hegel. I'm not going to.
But I need to know the pragmatists. And so, I've dabbled in the Metaphysical Club and found that a very helpful book. Yeah.
Every time I'm very sensitive to whenever you bring up the pragmatists, and every time you pull out this book.
Yeah, because I read William James years ago. I mean, I was in seminary in the 80s and you weren't even born yet. And it had there's a weird thing about growing old in that, my mother has this saying about when you grow old, you don't change, you just grow more so. And the older I get, the more I think my mom is right on that score, because I look at the kinds of stuff I was wrestling with even in college and seminary. It's not an accident that Peterson and I are only 1 year age different.
Sure.
There's all these layers, and they're all, and you would think, well, here's the little box that layer is in. No, it's a layer, but there's just so many of them. So, it's not an accident that Jordan colonized me, and that I was deeply fascinated by James at a very formative part of my life.
My friend Caleb, who I mentioned, he has a hypothesis he's calling the Canadian psychology hypothesis, which is, so we have economics professors here, and they say, well, I was growing up in the 70s when there was, gas lines and shortages and all these different problems. And it made me think, like, what's causing these problems? High crime rates, what's causing these social problems? And then they turned to economics and found the answers in economics. And so Caleb's hypothesis is that our generation, because of social media and because of the meaning crisis and higher suicide rates and higher depression rates, it's going to be the same thing for psychology. What's causing this crisis? And so where the previous generation were more economists, the next generation might be more psychologists or sociologists or something like that.
Oh. Yeah.
We'll
That's
see.
True.
It's a hypothesis.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Oh, it's really helpful. I'm going to have to check out your channel, because be part of what technology has afforded. I mean, I've been able to read since the, young years, but I'm dyslexic. So I've always had issues with reading. And then when, more material was out in audio format, that just made me voracious in some ways, because I figured out in school that if a professor just gave us a book and said, read it and you'll be tested on it, I did poorly. Mm-hmm. But if anything that the professor would say that was relevant would stick in my head. And if I had to recall it for an exam, I could.
Yeah.
So once, more stuff came in audible form, it was like, oh, wow, my life just got easier. And so I'll have to, it's really helpful that you're, because the other thing that I've learned in this crazy 2.5 years that I've been doing this is what a tremendous help to talk to people like you, because you're thinking along with me. You're working on your own projects, but you're listening to my stuff. It's like, oh yeah, this fits in. And then to be able to get that from you is like, oh, that's super helpful, because you have, I mean, here's this quote. If you just said, well, read Varieties of Religious Experience again. Oh yeah. Here's a quote. Oh, you have a quote that matches up. So it's super helpful.
That's really the dynamic of like an academic department too, because I'm going to begin the PhD in the fall at George Mason as well. But for the past couple of years, I've worked at the Mercatus Center, which is the where a lot of PhD students get funding. So I've been in a more academic environment and watched the way the professors interact with each other and with students. And that is really kind of when everyone is working on something like in close proximity, that like stuff spills all over each other. So, and the fault lines of where people disagree, they become much more pronounced.
Yeah. So
putting a bunch of thinkers in a box or on a Discord server, it's just a catalyst for thought. So it doesn't necessarily, sometimes there's their own, problems that arise from, the social dynamics and stuff like that, like who's cooler, who gets more citations, whatever.
Who's got chest lettuce?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm not aware of the phrase.
That's Luke.
Okay. Gotcha.
The randos notice that when Luke is on, they get more viewers. It's those, it's those 15 women of 1,000 in the Discord that watch when Luke watches, and maybe the other 5% gays. I don't know, but anyway.
Yeah. And I haven't done too much on the Discord, but I've been lurking on the Orthodoxy thread, and I've tried to be in there. There's a group doing a Lilith book club. I've tried to go as often as I can, even though I'm very behind on the reading. But
that's Luke's favorite book.
Luke's favorite book?
That's probably why they're doing Lilith. And
right. I don't think he's been in the group.
Oh, that's typical of Luke. He gets something started and he loses interest and walks away.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, the personal and the personalities are always just another layer of it. And it's the same in academia that, so a favorite professor, well, why is he a favorite? Well, part of it's personality. It's not just the imagined Platonic purity of the ideas, or humanity is astoundingly glorious in its manifold diversity and splendor.
One of the professors that at George Mason that we did an interview for him for our Economic Society podcast on campus, and he's one of the most fascinating guys I've ever met, and he's very funny, tells very funny stories. But in high school, he had no interest in academics whatsoever, and he was like a basketball star, and he got a scholarship to do basketball, and then at some point I think he injured his knee or something like that, and then he had to drop out. Was very disappointed, and then he started going to Grove City College actually, and then he met a professor there, and then he fell all into economics, and that's a whole another story of how he got interested in that. But now he kind of takes the dynamic of basketball and like coaching and like a sports team into the academic environment, and so it's he's an incredible personality, Pete Betke. Yeah.
So I lurk on Discord more than I talk, and I like playing. So I jumped into an empty portal voice chat room on the Portal Discord just to see what would happen. I put my full name out. I thought, let's see if anybody jumps in and how it goes. Mm-hmm. One person was talking about, what are the odds that Brett Weinstein would have a background in bat biology and now is somehow a podcast YouTuber in a COVID virus that, might have come from bats and so on and so forth. Another person made the point in that Discord. They said, but and they'd seen a video on something else, basically there's this funny thing that this mix of history is so huge that, I as a Christian would say, well, that's providential, but, that somewhere out there's this kid who loved basketball and was good at it, and his life was going in a totally different thing, and they got a knee injury, and now is a lecturer of economics. I mean, it's just glorious. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And you never know how you end up here. Like, I'm here because of somebody's YouTube comment.
Yeah.
So,
oh, and you're in your mother's basement.
Yeah. It's just for the summer, of course.
Of course.
It's a temporary situation.
Whenever I visit my mother, I always think I should make a podcast from her basement. I really should.
Yeah.
I'm making a podcast from my mother's basement.
So you can sympathize with the rest.
That's right. I'll hold up a bag of Cheetos. I'll play some Civilization because it's the only computer game I play.
Nice.
So.
Yeah.
We got a few minutes. The time is yours, my friend.
I guess the other guru that I subscribe to is Adam Smith, right? As an economist, he's a big guy for us, right?
And not just an economist. He's a the moralist.
Yeah, this is I've read this full book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is his first book, and I have not. Well, Wealth of Nations is much longer, but I've read parts of it. But this is the one that I've actually studied more.
Tell me about it. Because what I know from Adam Smith, a number of years ago, one of these great courses series on basically thoughts about capitalism, because it's like everybody's critiquing capitalism. I know nothing about capitalism. I don't know much economics. So I listened to that, and the chapter on Adam Smith was like, wow, that, and not the economic side, the moral side. It was like, oh yeah, economics is kind of a side. It's kind of a expression of the moral, cultural points he was making. Wow.
Yeah. And his footnote became a whole discipline.
Yes.
Yeah. But so I guess one interesting thing is, in the later 19th century, there were some German scholars who would debate about Adam Smith, and they had this thing they called Das Adam Smith problem, which was, okay, well, Adam Smith wrote this book on Theory of Moral Sentiments, and he's talking about everybody needs to sympathize with one another and have fellow feeling and, love each other and care about each other. It's more complicated than that, but that's the more the feeling of this book. And then The Wealth of Nations, it is not from the benevolence that the butcher, the baker, and the brewer give you your bread, but out of regard for their own self-interest. And so they go, well, there's this guy over here, and there's this guy over here, and it says the same name. So I don't know if it's different authors, right? And so their whole problem was, how do you reconcile these two halves of Adam Smith? And he didn't apparently see a problem. It's somewhere down the line, Theory of Moral Sentiments got really pushed to the side as the main focus of who Adam Smith was as a thinker, and he became Adam Smith the economist, not Adam Smith the moral philosopher, which is what his title was.
Yeah.
And but I guess a couple simple things from this book is, the first couple parts are on, he thinks that all moral approval, moral simply, the same root word as mores, it just means the way that people behave. Morals just means the way people behave. So the theory of moral sentiments is people's opinions or feelings about other people's behavior. Do I approve of or disapprove of your behavior? And he goes, yeah, well, we can say this is not as simple as just like, do you do things that I like or things that I don't like? It's, when I observe you, do I approve of your conduct? Do I think that you are truly good or truly bad? So we have this, it's somewhat like a conscience, right? And he thinks that all of these are in some way related to sympathy, or our ability to step into your shoes. And this is not just when you feel bad, I feel bad, but it's my ability to understand your situation, or sort of to mix our
to stand in your shoes, to feel what you're feeling.
Yeah. And this runs counter to a lot of the strict individualism that happens in economics, or people call it atomic individualism, which I realized is kind of a redundant phrase, because atom means indivisible. So saying an atomic individual means an indivisible individual. Which is kind of,
we say it, it's like the Hebrew. We say it twice for emphasis. We just use two different words because we'd get bored halfway through the phrase.
Yeah, and people mean like a specific thing by it, which that's more complicated probably, but so I mean, he kind of goes from there, and this sense of we sympathize, we kind of develop sentiments about each other, and then he says, even when you're alone, how do you sort of come up with opinions about yourself? And he says, well, there's kind of another person involved inside yourself that he calls the man within the breast. And so you're kind of having a conversation with the man within the breast while you're thinking about your own behavior, right? So the individual actually is composed of kind of different selves, right? And that got me thinking about the word individual. It doesn't so much mean that there's only one straight consciousness going on here that I can completely control and understand. It just means that the multiple personalities that are going on here, they can't be separated from one another. They're kind of locked in a room together, and they've got to deal with each other, whether that means that there's internal strife or internal harmony, right? And all that an individual means is these people it's like married people that do not have the option of being divorced. That's the two halves of you.
Yep.
Right? Yep. So a married couple, to the extent that they are a union of two people,
they become one flesh.
They become one flesh. They're individuals that they're kind of an individual that does have the option of divorcing. Right. So it creates a little bit of a different dynamic. But so the character that he adds another character called the impartial spectator, right? So when we do really want to understand and give ourselves, he doesn't call it objective. We would use the word objective today, but I kind of don't really like the word. We have to imagine, let's say like there's the two of us talking, and then there's somebody watching our conversation, right? I have opinions about what I'm saying. You have opinions about what you're saying. Sometimes I agree, sometimes you agree, disagree. But somebody that's watching is neither of us, and they're impartial with respect to me or you. Maybe they know you better because they've watched your videos, so they're partial to you or something like that. But the more distant someone gets from the situation, the more impartial they are. But in real life, the more distant someone gets from a situation, at the same time, the less they know about the situation. So I talked about this in one of the William James videos I did, because I think this is related to William James stuff a little bit. I don't know if you ever did those magic eye pictures.
Yeah,
it was
could like never see them.
Yeah, it was sometimes you got to get the trick right, but if you look at it from far away, it looks like all this fuzzy stuff.
Right.
If you look at it up close and then you pull it away, it becomes a more integrated picture. So right. Somehow you have to straddle these two things of being intimately familiar with something, but also far enough away that you can be intimately familiar with everything to the point that you can integrate them into one picture, one more beautiful picture. So he said the real goal is to not sympathize with everyone else, but rather to sympathize with the impartial spectator, who is impartial to the whole of reality in some way. And it's hard to figure out how to do that. And so we have to come up with sort of rules to guide us this way or that way, with respect to generally what would an impartial spectator approve of. He also splits us over time into two different people. So he talks about the virtue of thrift. How does the impartial spectator look at the virtue of thrift? Well, I could spend all my money today on candy or whatever, or I could save it for my future and my children's future and their children's future. So me today is the person in charge of spending it though, right? So me today has to sympathize with me tomorrow. And if I properly do that, then I save money, right? So thrift is a virtue because the impartial spectator cares about me today and future me equally. Whereas me today, without the impartial spectator, just cares about me. And so this can happen across time for an individual and across space between individuals. To the extent that your Voltron video was great yesterday, because I really think that's very much what's going on, is the ability to sympathize and to incorporate, to go into, to become one body.
Become one body, yep.
Is like a real driving important force. I don't have all the words for it yet, but well, I was starting to think this way when I was a freshman, sophomore, and kind of leaving more hardcore, brutalist libertarian circles and entering more like softer ones, for lack of a better term. So
Well, that's, Peterson got at that through Piaget.
Right. Yeah, yes, I've noticed that same thing.
Because that's how you laid it out is exactly how Peterson laid out Piaget's equilibrated self, where there's, it's got to work for me. I think it's probably a pragmatic approach to Piaget, because, people accuse me often quite correctly of misquoting people I read. And I'm misquoting them according to the biases that I have, and I'm projecting my reading of heresy onto Alistair McGrath, and might think it's a improvement. I might think it's a corruption, but no, that's really helpful, because I remember listening to that lecture on Adam Smith, thinking, wow, this is brilliant stuff, and all that came down to me was the invisible hand.
Yeah. And the invisible hand is a very important part. And he actually, when you say the invisible hand, there's 3 times that he uses the phrase. One of them is in this book. And he gives an example of, there's a rich man who has a bunch of wealth, a lot of it that he cannot, or he has a bunch of food, let's say, that he cannot eat all himself, right? So since he has all these servants around him, he just gives them food, as if by an invisible hand he's led towards benevolence. It's very, and then in the Wealth of Nations, it's different. It's all these speculators speculating on corn and whether or not, it's a good investment to buy corn in the plenty years to sell it for higher prices in the lean years, as if by an invisible hand they equalize the price and make sure there's no shortage of corn, which is benevolent for everybody. But those people were selfish. And the invisible hand is both selfish and non-selfish.
Wow.
So, yeah, the professor that I mentioned, Dan Klein, he thinks the 18th century, Adam Smith, David Hume, they were a peak, and we've gone downhill since then. on some, maybe in economics at least.
Yeah. Huh. That's really cool. I look forward to poking around in your channel.
Sure.
Because keep, I don't care if you only have 43 subscribers. Keep doing it.
Yeah. Everybody had 43 at one point.
Exactly. I didn't even have 43 when I was doing the Freddie and Paul show. I had 15.
Yeah.
So,
and when I have students, they're going to get extra credit for subscribing. So
that's right. No, dude, come on. You got to get in the book game, Yeah. Oh, here are all my books. They're all required reading. Go spend $50 a pop for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm familiar. Yeah.
Well, Marcus, this has been so, thank you so much for signing up for a slot. And I'm sorry that they're limited, and I know that people get frustrated, and but I'm trying to.
I was convinced for many months that the system was just broken, and then you didn't put up any slots. But
no, I do put up slots, and it's just that, and I do it because I do it for exactly what I've enjoyed with this conversation, is that if I were in charge of my schedule, we might never have this conversation. And you couldn't have shared that quote with me about William James and Adam Smith. And here you have done me the tremendous favor and generosity of listening to me and working through my stuff. And even though it feels like the opposite, it feels like I'm giving you something, in many ways, you're really giving me something, because my stuff is out there and you can take it or leave it. But what you gave me is something apart from my agency. So it's an invisible hand at work.
Well, as an economist, I'll just say it's mutually beneficial exchange.
Mutually beneficial exchange. So,
yeah.
Well, I've got more exchanges on the line today. So, but this
yeah.
Can I just by the nature of the conversation, is this something that you'd let me share on my channel?
Yeah, almost definitely.
Good, because I'd love for more people to find your YouTube channel, and you're not going to get a big bump from this,
right?
But again, if your goal for that little, I always tell people, I say, look, do it if it's worth doing it for you, that should be the criteria, because that means you'll keep doing it.
It certainly is. So yeah, I will keep. I mean, I did it for 4 years just on my website. I would just make these little like articles about econ or whatever. So yeah.
No, it's good. Well, thank you, Marcus. And I know I'll bump into you on Twitter or this Discord server or wherever, but what's really nice is having had a conversation with you now at least I know who I'm talking to.
Yeah. Oh, and we didn't even talk about Tolkien this time.
Gosh, a conversation without Tolkien?
Yeah.
That's like a day without sunshine, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very good. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
Marcus.
me.
All right.
Nice.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.